This is Mark Mulcaster from Fantha Tracks, and you are listening to the Rebel Base Card Podcast. Great pull, kid.
Are you listening to any of this?
Yes, we're listening.
Oh yeah, what did I just say?
Are you listening to any of this?
Everything's gonna be all right, kid.
You found the Rebel Base Card Podcast.
She may not look like much, but she's got it where it counts, kid.
I'm your host, Greg McLaughlin.
Have I made a few bad decisions? Sure.
We talk about cards, collecting Star Wars, and to people in the Star Wars community.
Don't worry, we're gonna meet up with some friends of mine.
Look for special episodes called The Breakfast Pack, talking about your favorite Star Wars shows.
We will never have a better chance than this.
All right, let's get started.
Well, perhaps it is time to begin again.
Welcome back, or if this is your first episode, welcome aboard. My name is Greg McLaughlin, and this is the Rebel Base Card Podcast. Good show for you tonight, as my guest is Mark Newbold, who returns, I think, for the sixth time, if I look back over the catalog of shows here. But recently, he had a cover story in the latest Star Wars Insider, number 230, that featured an interview with Anthony Daniels. Of course, we just finished off a bunch of news. It was a heavy news week in the Star Wars universe, as we covered in our Breakfast Pack episode that Greg Cass and I did. But I wanted to get a chance to go over not only the Star Wars Insider article, but get a little bit of how the sausage is made, so it speaks, but also talk about Andor Season 2, as well as Celebration Japan, which I know Mark is going to. So, and of course, anytime you talk with Mark Newbold, he just brings the goods, and you just got to turn on the mic and make sure you record it, because it's just going to be great. So I hope you enjoy this conversation between Mark and myself, and I'll see you on the other side.
Hi, this is Femi Taylor. I play Ula in Return of the Jedi, Jabba the Hutt's slave dancer. You're listening to the Rebel Base Card Podcast.
We're in attack position now, sir.
Hold here.
We're not going to attack.
I have my orders from the Emperor himself. He has something special planned for me. We only need to keep him from escaping.
After as many times as I have had you on the program, I don't know until your recent picture came up with you with the Star Wars Insider cover, which I will get to in a minute. But yeah, it started me to think, I don't know if anyone's ever asked you, but I am curious. You write thousands of words daily, every other day, tens of thousands a week. But what do you like to type on? Are you laptop and just whenever? Are you separate keyboard? Do you have a special keyboard? Is there a keyboard you like? You have hit many keys, but I am curious, what's your bag and what do you prefer?
That's a really good question. I've never been asked that. I'm currently using a gaming laptop, and because it's fast, because I've always got a million windows open doing different things. I do miss the old PC days. I do miss the old clackety keyboards, because I was typewriter trained, so that shows you how old I am. So I do sort of miss that. This is a nice, soft, smooth keyboard, which took me a while to get used to. And I did use another laptop before this that I've still got and use as my sort of travel laptop. But yeah, it's laptops. I mean, I think I do prefer mouse, keyboard, that kind of setup. Just for the smoothness of moving stuff, because doing the site, I mean, it's not just the writing, it's editing pictures and doing all that sort of stuff. So most of the images that sort of accompany Fantha articles I've either cropped or designed or edited or whatever it might be. So there's a balance of things there. But for the most part, for the last, I'd say probably 4 or 5 years, it's probably been on a laptop. So I guess that's my preference, I suppose, just by nature of that's the thing I tend to use the most. But I do miss the old PC days. But then again, listening to music now, people getting back into vinyl, getting back into CDs. I miss my old separates, my old music setup. So it's probably as much a habit thing as anything else.
I think it has to be because you write so much and you're typing. You have done it for so long. On one level, it doesn't matter. Like I know where the keys are. I need to hit them. and I'm pouring the ideas and the news out of my head. But another sometimes, and it may also be, now, when we saw the picture, you know, I figured the jammies are standard issue for Mark.
Very much.
But was that location, is that kind of your office, where you kind of set up, or do you kind of move around the house?
That's literally where I'm sitting right now.
Okay.
So in the living room, I think, well, Ruth took that photograph, sort of stood up. Yeah, the thing came through the insider came through the post. I was quite pleased with this one, not because I've had cover articles before, but this one just worked out well because it wasn't just an interview done in one shot. You know, I interviewed Anthony before he went and did the Star Wars in Concert stuff. Mm-hmm. And then I dropped his wife a line, Chris, who gets mentioned in the article, who's kind of not the liaison, because I can speak to Anthony direct if I need to, but I always tend to go through Chris just out of politeness as much as anything else. And we get on great anyway. And I said, how did it go? You know, any chance he's happy to talk for 10 minutes just to add a little sort of sidebar piece to the article, because the article wasn't quite, it had been submitted to Insider, but it hadn't quite been locked down and finished. And she says, well, if you're free tomorrow, he's free at 3:00 tomorrow afternoon, you know, if you want to have a little chat. So I think we're going to have a quick 5 minutes. Hi, how you doing? 10 minutes. It was great. This is what happened. And thanks, Anthony. See you in Japan, sort of thing. And sort of an hour later, we were still talking. So he really enjoyed it. So I was quite pleased in that sense that I was able to fold in. He actually gave me not more, but he gave me additional insight when we were talking after he'd done the show, as opposed to before he'd done the show, when he'd done all the rehearsals and the practicing, and, you know, because he has to learn sort of 2,000 words verbatim because he doesn't use an auto cue. So it kind of all came together really nicely. And I wrote it in a slightly different style. I tend to do straight up Q&As is kind of where I tend to go, because I just like the natural flow of a conversation, whereas the editor, Chris, this time said, put it in a bit of a narrative flow, because we can work in more information and more detail that way. So it was a little bit different for me in that sense, which I actually really enjoyed. So I think my next article that I've sort of next interview that I've done, that's probably 2/3 done, I've stripped out all the speech and I've just got that edited to where I want it to be, and now I'm loading that into like a narrative flow and taking key points from the conversation out of the back and forth between me and the guest and working it into the information. So as a writing process, I actually found that more fun. Whereas I just like the back and forth, and I strip my. I mean, we've talked loads of times, so you know I rabbit on. So anybody that knows me, that reads my insider stuff, knows fully well that any question that I have edited back to a sentence, in reality, was a 2-minute, 6-paragraph, you know, War and Peace monologue. That's a trick as well, trying to whittle me down. But yeah, it seems to. And the editor's happy, Chris is happy, because I'm basically, give or take, hitting the word count that he wants. So yeah, it
has to be fun. Or on the one hand, it's like you like you said, you've talked to Anthony a number of times, and I think in some cases that brings the level of tension maybe down. I mean, both of you have a job to do. He has to talk about the event, but you also have to, you know, there's ground you never really want to probably cover twice. You have to think about the time, but his comfort with you must just at this level, you know, just make it a little easier. I mean, how do you kind of wrap into talking, you know, like over and over with the same person, but, you know, relationship must evolve is how I can edit myself down to that last sentence, right? But your relationship has kind of evolved over time. That when you queue up and when I'm ready to talk to him, now it's maybe a little different.
Yeah, it is. I mean, first time I spoke to him was, from memory, it was about 2007. So I was running my outside lightsaber, and I'd done some interviews and got a bit of traction with the interview side of things. And this is, I think at that point, I'd done one article for Insider. So next year's 20 years writing for Insider, but wow. There was one article, then there was like a 4-year gap, and then it's been fairly consistent for the last sort of 15 years. But that first one got my foot in the door and gave me the opportunity to sort of progress it. In the intervening time between that first one and then the ongoing ones, my site Lightsaber, as I say, was a fanfic site. Then it became a news site. Then the interviews really started to get noticed. So the ForceNet back in the day would share it, and other sites would pick up on it. But more importantly for me, I suppose, in the long run, people at Lucasfilm were reading it. So I got the Anthony interview. I can't remember how how I got it. I can't remember exactly how that came to be, but when I interviewed him, and I've still got the audio somewhere, when I interviewed him, the nicest part for me was he said, well, you've come recommended by Lucasfilm. So I think he started off, and Anthony really does put great stock in Lucasfilm, and this is George Lucasfilm as well, back in 2007, of course. He does put, and still does put, great stock in the opinions of others. So, not to say he's not his own man, but, you know, I kind of came recommended to a degree. So we had a nice chat, and he's known, I think by his own admission, he knows this. Some people have interviewed him, and he's been great and fun and bubbly and engaged. And then I think when he gets asked the what's it like in the suit type questions, he kind of switches off a little bit. And I have asked him that question, but in the flow of discussing, you know, the process of how the suit was refined over time, how things changed, what it was like being left propped up on a sack truck in the sun for for an hour when everyone goes for lunch, that kind of thing. So you can ask those questions, but you know, there's a way of asking it. So I had that first interview. I think it was another 2 or 3 years until I interviewed him again, I think when the DVD sets came out. And then there's just been a steady, you know, every few years I've managed to speak to him. But really in the last sort of 5 years, it's been reasonably regular, to the point that now, and bearing in mind, I can't even think the amount of people he must meet over time, people on set, people he works with, people who are interviewing him, any number of people he can come into contact with. Now I know if I see him, he recognises me and he gives me a wave, or have a quick 5-minute chat or whatever. So that's wonderful. But here's me rabbiting again. To your point, yeah, I suppose over time, I know that I've asked him the same questions more than once. But the beauty of, for example, Anthony, is he must be the most regular sort of top tier Star Wars guy to return to the franchise again and again. So from that first time in 2007, when he's still coming off the back of Revenge of the Sith, which is 20 years old this year, which is insane. You know, that's pre-Clone Wars, which he wouldn't have spoke to me about because, you know, it hadn't been announced, even though we'd probably recorded his stuff even at that point. So, you know, you've had the Clone Wars era, you've had the animation stuff, you've had the gaming stuff, you've had the return of Star Wars with The Force Awakens and the sequel trilogy, and then all the other spin-offs. So you can kind of ask the same questions, and there's a different answer because it's an ever-evolving thing. But what really sort of worked for him and was a benefit to me was the thing we just spoke about in Insider, doing Star Wars in Concert. The first line of his autobiography was, "It was the best job I ever had." And so when I spoke to him this time about going back after, 10 years, I guess, near as damn it, what was it like? How was it for you? You know, kind of without saying it too on the nose, we're all getting older, you know,
right.
Yeah, and being up there in front of, you know, a few thousand people, it's not the easiest job in the world. He absolutely loves it. He explained the nerves, he explained the process, but he just kept going back to, well, you know, the first line of my autobiography, it was the best job I ever had, and I'm holding to that. So it was sweet. But yeah, but the one thing to say is that, you know, I don't know if I'll ever speak to him again. Hopefully I will, for whatever reason or, you know, occasion. And I hope that they take that thing out on tour again, because I'd love to see that again. I never go into a call with him or a face-to-face with him. I've been lucky enough to have been to his house a couple of times, which was amazing, right in the smack in the middle of London. It was amazing. I never go in cocky, too familiar, too overly, you know, easy, let's say, because it's Anthony Daniels. In our realm, you know, even though I'm fortunate to have a kind of a relationship with him, that I guess I'd stretch to call it a professional relationship. That's not right, but there is a relationship there. If I ever go in and get too sassy, too quick, too cocky, too quick, because he does like that. He likes the back and forth. He's very witty, and he picks up on things quite quickly in a good way. I don't do that. It'd be so easy. It would be so easy to, but I always try and treat every time I speak to anybody that I've interviewed more than once, and there's a lot that I've interviewed more than once, like it's the first time. And then if, you know, I can read the room. If they're comfortable and relaxed, then I can be a bit more relaxed, and we can just go at it. It's different doing interviews on stage than doing interviews for the magazine, which is quite quite relaxed in the sense that this interview I did for Insider the other day, I was very keen to say, don't worry about stumbling over your words. I'm recording it, but it's for annotation. If you think of a better answer, let's just do the answer again. Take your time. Don't rush your answers. It's totally at your pace, and that actually worked out really, really well. And then I was able to sort of send the transcript to them, and they had a look, and they're happy with it, and so on and so forth, just as a courtesy thing. So there's different avenues and different arenas to do these interviews in. I think I've kind of got the hang of it now. I'd like to think, but I know I'll come unstuck one day. One day I'll sit down with somebody that I think is going to be an absolute gold mine, not easy, but comfortable, chatty, whatever. I've got this thing in my head where I know a few people that know Daisy Ridley, and I'd love to interview Daisy Ridley, and I'm hopeful one day I will. And having seen her, how ebullient she is, how chatty she is, how confident she is, how she's always got an answer. Me, who goes into 9 out of 10 interviews with nothing written down, I just turn record and, like we are now, just have a chat. I just have this little nightmare feeling that I'll do that one day and nothing comes back. I get nothing back. I had an interview years ago with Anna Dean Foster. It's a stretch to call it an interview. It was an email correspondence. And I thought, Anna Dean Foster, my God, he wrote that Star Wars novel. The stuff I've read of his, the first spin-off thing I ever read really from Star Wars was Splinters. And right. I can't wait to talk to this guy, and he's writing his answers, and he's a writer. So I should get some great answers here, because I'd had other people had sent me replies to because this is like the early 2000s. This is before we could do what we're doing now and, have that kind of interaction across the ocean sort of thing. And it was one-word answers. It was like I'd sat down with him and, and spat in his coffee and, also it was the weirdest tone. It wasn't at all what I expected. And then another friend of mine years later interviewed him face to face and had the greatest time. And, and that was one where I thought, oh, I really wish I'd had the chance to speak to him face to face. So it is a bit of a mixed bag, but yeah, I just think never taking it for granted that it's going to be easy, because generally I'm a fairly good talker, so I can get a conversation going, but that's not to say that will always be the case.
Right. And, recently you had a chance, I think you kind of emceed a panel that had, I want to say, Guy Henry and Julian Glover together. Yeah. And I know you had talked to both of them before. And on one hand, it's got to be interesting because there's questions that that you need to kind of get across the audience. They're there for that. But I think it must make your job easier because, once again, they've kind of seen you. They kind of know where you're going. They kind of know the drill. And sometimes you're trying to keep them from maybe going on autopilot and then try to get them a little more engaged. That still has to be a bit of, especially, neither of them are, Julian's a little older, I'm assuming, than Guy Henry, but it's still, it's like, come on, we got to prime the pump a bit, but it's still, it's going to make it, it makes it easier but harder for you.
Yeah, it's a funny one, that. It's a good example, actually. Julian I interviewed not that long ago for Insider, but then I see him I interviewed him on stage at London Film and Comic-Con last year, did it at Festival of the Force this year. Right. Guy, I think the first time I interviewed him was just after the pandemic, and that was for Insider, but luckily he was a sweetheart. I said, can we just do 10-15 minutes for my podcast, Fantha Tracks, which I always sort of try and set up, serious, proper, Star Wars official magazine that goes around the world, Insider first, and then right now we've loosened up a bit, can we have a sort of 10-15 minute easy chat? What's the conventions like? What have you been up to lately, kind of thing, for Fantha, and that tends to work pretty well. So Julian, again, he's very polite, very courteous. I think he recognises me when he sees me now. I've been seeing him at conventions for sort of 20 odd years. I've got pictures of me and him back in like 2006, 2007. So I think he knows me enough that he's comfortable to have a chat. Guy's probably 10 years older than me, so is not that much of a difference, and he's very easygoing. He's not the sort of stern character you see on screen at all. A million miles from that. He's the loosest, easiest, funniest. He loves his red wine. We've had some fun at conventions where he's had a bit too much. So he's funny. So I, as I say, as you mentioned, I interviewed him at Festival of the Force. It's March now, so February. And from what I understand, I'm doing it again in May. So to your point, I will sit down with him on a very similar stage in a different city, very similar stage, with the mission of some of the people in the audience will know a bit about him. He's quite a popular TV actor over here. He was in a big hit show called Casualty and Holby City, the spin-off. So people know him over here, and they know him from Potter. So I need to kind of mention Potter as well, and some of the other bits that he's done. But outside of what was it like wearing the Meccano on your head to film the Tarkin stuff, and by then maybe, I don't know, by May 25th is when I'm interviewing him. By then, maybe we'll have seen him in Andor season 2. I don't know. I haven't asked him. It could be very easy for me to ask him and him to give me a little sly wink, and then I want to enjoy the moment. If he walks in and it's Tarkin and it's him, I want to enjoy that as a fan as much as anybody else. But maybe I don't know. But maybe that will have happened by then. So that'll give us something else to talk about. But yeah, to your point, yeah, I've got to kind of ask him the certain questions that Mr. Smith and Mrs. Jones sitting on row 4 and 10. Won't know that. Oh, that was him in Rogue. Oh, okay, and they start to put the pieces together. And then, but I've always got other questions I can ask him. Where is it now? I interviewed him at Farthest From, which is a collecting show down on the South Coast, and he lives on the South Coast, so it was a local show for him. And he told me in the interview that at some point he didn't give up acting, but he stepped away for a little bit. He wanted a break, and he learnt how to drive a bus along like a coach. And basically became a coach driver for a little while for a company that, just drive. And he loved it. And every now and again, somebody would recognise him, and he kind of thought that was funny. And so, if I'm running out of questions, or whoever he's paired up with that show, they tend to do 2 people at a time. If I'm thinking, I need something just to get the crowd a bit more pepped up, I'll ask him the bus story, because I know that he tells it really well. So there's always little things that you can pepper in, but yeah, it's a good point. Repeat interviews can be tricky because you're serving more than one master in that instance. I'm not trying to drag out anything particularly new. I'm trying to keep it bubbling along because there's a crowd in front of us, but also you've got to hit some of the key points. It's all well me knowing the answer. I want them to hear it from the person.
Do you get any time with them before you go on, or is it just you pop on and then they know to kind of be there at X time, and then you're kind of greeting them for the first time as it starts?
It very much depends on the show. I mean, Festival of the Force, for example, which by the way was fantastic show. It went down so well for a first event for these guys. First time they'd done a Star Wars show. It was brilliant. There was a few wrinkles that they hadn't quite ironed out, so me and actually Jack from Explore the Force, another great podcast, would go down and get the guest, and sometimes I knew them, so hi Mark, hi Guy, whatever, so it's easy. Anything we can't talk about? Well, obviously you can't talk about Andor season 2. Definitely not. And we had another guest from actor from Andor season 2 as well. He was the same. I can tell you I'm in it, but I can't tell you anything about it. But yeah, it's just but then at London Film and Comic Con, which they have the Star Wars zone, and I've done the stage there for a few years, quite often I'll sit down with guests that last year they do a winter, spring and summer show. So the winter show last year, they asked me to come and do a bit of hosting, last minute thing, that their regular host had stepped away. And they said, we've got a couple of Star Wars guests, but it's mostly non-Star Wars. Can you come down and do it? Yeah, put me up in a hotel. I'll cover my expenses. I'll do it. That's fine, which they did. And I sat down with the kid, the first person after the girl that gets eaten by the shark at the start of Jaws, the kid that gets eaten after, Alex Kintner, the actor who played Alex, sat down with him for half an hour. And I'd never met him. I literally met him as we were walking onto the stage, shook his hand, and I'd got my Fantha shirt on. As you can see, I'm a Star Wars guy, but I know enough about Jaws. I know enough about Spielberg. Well, it'll be fine. I wasn't concerned. But at the same event, I was interviewing people from Friday the 13th, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, all sorts of stuff like that. Films that I haven't seen for 30 years. I had a horror phase when I was a kid. I've seen nothing since, but I managed to get through it. Just listen enough. They give you enough that you can kind of, pick it up, or just read the brochure, the program for the event. She was in such and such with so and so. She died in this scene in whatnot, and it was just enough to keep it going. So it's nice to have a chat, but you can have too much of a chat sometimes. And sometimes guests are nervous. I interviewed Alice Krieg on stage at Destination Star Trek. About 5 or 6 years ago. and she was really nervous. And this is the Boar Queen from First Contact, which is my favourite Trek film, by the way. So I was thrilled to meet her. And we stood backstage for about 15 minutes, and she was like, "You're not going to ask me any trick questions. I promise you, this is not an ambush. I'm not here to." That's a relevant word. I'm not here to catch you out. I'm not here to set you up. I just want you to enjoy yourself. I want to learn a little bit about you, and everybody out there hopefully benefits from the conversation. And she, she was kind of cool, calm. Went out clearly nervous for the first 5 minutes. Half an hour later, bullet answers coming straight back at me, and it was great. So. It does depend. And then you get others, like I'm good friends with Brian Herring, BB-8.
Right.
I'm losing count now the amount of times I've interviewed Brian on stage. And it's easy with Brian. Honestly, you can go out for half an hour. And I'll do it one day. And I'm going to tell him I'm going to do it. I'll just go, "Hi, Brian, how are you?" And half an hour later, I'll go, "Cheers, Brian, that was great." Because he could just do it himself. So some people are just so sharp and witty, and the recall's good. And, it's... it's different with everyone.
Yeah, I was going to say, Brian, he's one of us and one of them, as it were, as a collector and a fan and a performer, and, no stranger to the con circuit. So that must make it fun.
It does. And he's, like I say, he's a mate now. We've become friends over the years. So, and we talk quite regularly. He phoned me earlier, actually, and I missed the call. I need to phone him back. But he loves to chat about fandom stuff. So I know he'll phone up and go, "What do you think about the Kathleen Kennedy stuff?" Because he is somebody who's kind of in the bubble a little bit, will want to know what somebody more out of the bubble, like myself, thinks about what's been going on. And then, "Oh, I'm off to so-and-so. I'm off to France this weekend for a convention, or I'm off to this or whatever. What are you up to?" So he kind of likes to have his finger on the pulse because he's out there in the world of doing events and signing stuff and conventions, so he kind of likes to know what the state of play is. But he's one of the easier people to interview because I really don't have to do very much.
Oh my goodness. And I would have to say, like I said, some of the stuff as far as like, in our previous episode, Greg Cass and I brought Greg and I on, and we talked about, the Kathleen Kennedy rumors, not rumors, and of course the Andor, season 2, and then the schedule, which I know that you and Mark will talk about a bit, more than a bit on Making Tracks. But I am kind of curious as far as the convention schedule. Have you seen it sort of take an uptick, or is the fact that I'm paying so much more attention to Fantha Tracks and Making Tracks is that I just now know the schedule a little better? But have you seen the number of shows and the intensity of the shows increase over the last 3-5 years?
Yeah, weirdly. I mean, I didn't think it would to the degree that it has. Certainly here in the UK, anyway, obviously, where we're sort of boots on the ground. And of course, Mark, as you know, being Rebel Legion, he's at shows all the time. So this weekend, as we speak, he's at Pinewood at the Futures Festival. Well, where are we now? Start of March. So at the end of March, I'm at Echo Base, which is a big collecting event in Redditch. Right. Which I think Mark's coming to because there's a meal the night before. I'm sure there's something happening in the month before. But the point being is that very, very, really easily, you could find an event with some decent guests every weekend. But now, whereas a few years ago, Showmasters, who do London Film and Comic-Con and used to do Destination Star Trek, now it's just called Destination Trek, would do those kind of events. They were the big player, along with MCM, who got bought out by Reed. But now there's Monopoly, who are a big company that have sort of been around for a long time, but they're getting bigger and bigger and getting bigger and better guests. So there's more and more events. There's a UK company called Megacon that's doing events at the XL, which is no small thing. Right. And then there's sort of medium to small size events all around. So there's always been small events in the UK. And for the most part, most people in not all, because it's still, from driving from the tip of Scotland to the bottom of the UK, you're still sort of looking at 10 or 11 hour drive if the traffic's okay. So it's not achievable for everybody, but certainly within the UK, if there's an event in Manchester, I'm in the middle of the country, Manchester's a couple of hours, Norwich the other way is about 3 hours. Right. Newcastle's about 3.5 hours north, London's about 2.5 hours south. So, you can kind of get to places and it's not too much of a killer. But yeah, I think there's a lot more. I think there's a lot more events now, and events with decent guests. And I think the reason for that, and there is a reason for that, we've got Star Wars Fan Fun Day coming up in May at Blackburn Football Club, which is always a wonderful event. I can't recommend that show enough. And this year they've got guests from a multitude of shows. and a lot of guests that people just won't have seen before. And because you've got actors from, especially in the UK, you've got a lot of actors who were in Andor, so you've got access to Andor actors, and slightly less for Ahsoka and Mando and shows like that, which are American based. But Acolyte and Andor, they're here. The kids from Skeleton Crew, they're going to be coming over to the UK soon to do stuff. So hopefully we'll have a little bit of FaceTime with those guys. And in fact, we spoke to Kiriana Kratter on the last episode of Making Tracks, just a quick sort of 10-15 minute catch up, which was lovely. She's a lovely girl. And so there's the opportunity for things like that. But around the country, there's always something going on. So yeah, I think it's looking pretty healthy at the moment, which is weird because the temperature out there is that Star Wars is cooling off and people are losing interest. And I think this week with the whole Kathleen thing, where all the certain demographic, or if that's the right word, certain segment of the fandom that were starting to have parties that Kathleen was going, and then actually I'm not going anywhere, thank you very much, I've got loads to do, this is succession plan, but I ain't going anywhere. This week has kind of really, it's been a palate cleanser for me. It's felt like, because it can get into a bit of a funk sometimes, just see negativity, and then wow, look at where we are with Dawn of the Jedi, look at where we are with the Sean Levy film. We actually know a little bit more, actually quite a lot more than we did this time last week. So all of a sudden it's like, okay, Mando and Grogu is on the doorstep, but there's plenty coming after. And that was just film. She didn't even mention television. We know Ahsoka season 2 starts filming here in the UK fairly soon, but beyond that, we don't know what else is really happening on television. Hopefully Japan will give us some animation news. But yeah, I think it's been a good week.
Well, and that's a great segue in, because we were kind of talking about after the shock and awe of the Andor season 2 trailer and said schedule, which I know you and Mark will kind of have to tackle. And by the time this kind of comes out, in a few days or so, it'll have settled down, but it still presents an interesting. This is kind of the first time we've seen Star Wars kind of do this. Not that we haven't seen them debut a series with 1, 2, or 3, but here we have Andor in these movie-fied chunks, which for the fan, they'll love it. But even so, I mean, it presents a challenge for anybody covering it. But I am still kind of curious when we go back and look at, will we watch it in the same way again? This is sort of a unique moment in time where these 12 episodes get condensed into 4 nights.
Yeah.
For really the only time, and so you only ever see that. Maybe it's the way you're going to view it, but I mean, it still has to. I think you maybe still have to process it in your mind as far as like how I'm going to ingest it, and then how I'm going to cover it.
Well, that was initially when that piece came out. One of our crowd read the piece in detail fairly quickly and said, it looks like they're coming out in chapters, 3 episodes a chunk, 4 weeks, it's all done. Immediate reaction, until we really pass it down, continues to be my thought. Oh, they spent probably 250 million on this thing, and it's in and done in less than a month. That seems crazy to me. If I didn't know better, because I'm only hearing good things about it, if I didn't know better, that would scream lack of confidence to me, not confidence. But then again, if you look at the numbers, and I haven't, but I'd be very curious to see what the numbers were for that first week of Andor season 1 when they did put 3 episodes out, how strong that was. And we know they're the slow 3 establishing episodes, the 3 after especially the Narkina, and then the final 3 picked up the pace, the story's deeper, and we're leading up to Rick's Road, and I guess in season 2 we'll be leading up to a culmination point with that as well. Because I can only see that, Tony Gilroy said that it'll take you right to the doorstep of Rogue One. And I think the very last thing you'll see in Andor at the end of season 2, in the same way the end of season 1 showed you the little components we saw them building on Narkina, and then just panned out to the Death Star. I just think the final shot will be pan out as Cassian is walking down the corridor with all the people around him on the rings of Kafrene. That to me is the way you finish season 2. Who knows? That's just what I'm seeing in my head. But it's going to be really tricky to review. It's tricky enough doing an extra episode a week on top of the regular stuff we do. We do the reaction chat stuff. So to do a reaction chat for 3 episodes, because because we do that as quickly as we can, one, to sit down and watch 3 episodes in a chunk, that's a 3-hour chunk of time. That's an ask straight away to do it concentrated. And 2, just to contain all that information and be able to do it justice, sort of regurgitating it into a review, a video review or a podcast review. That's going to be a challenge. So I'm not mad keen on that. For me, again, there's been Star Wars stuff come out in the past where you've had an episode a week, with some of the Mando stuff. I'm like, if they said we're going to put an episode a month out and we're going to absolutely, monopolize the heck out of it. We're going to give you toys. We're going to do, reaction shows. We're going to go behind the scenes. We're going to, all the stuff that they could do. I think that'd be amazing for me personally. So to have Andor, where I was thinking, wow, it's going to kick off in April. We're still going to be watching Andor in July. We're not. It's going to be done before May 25th. For goodness sake, the whole thing will be done before Star Wars Day. I know May 4th is Star Wars Day. It's the hallmark Star Wars Day to me. May 25th is Star Wars Day. So it will be done by then. So my hope, because they're moving it through so quickly, is that Japan will give us some really significant reveals. We get a trailer for something, we get an announcement of something, we get news of something that when Andor is finished and we can sit back and chew it over and enjoy it, that we can go, great, now this is next. We've got something else to look forward to.
In a moment of time, we are pre-Andor. And in some cases, a good journalist, a lot of times, if they're sent to an event, let's say, you have things that are sort of written, you have skeletons of thing in your head. I am curious, before we see Andor, are you already thinking about what the legacy of Andor is to Disney Plus and Lucasfilm going forward from Celebration?
That's a cracking question. Yes, I am. I think because it's been such a rocky road, I think, over the past few years, and because in that Deadline piece, Kathleen Kennedy says, I came in, I was, there alongside George for 6 months as co-chair, and then George stepped away and I carried on, and, we've gone through all the stuff we've gone through. And it's not just movies. People just think of the movies. When she started, there was no Disney Plus and no plans for Disney Plus, or maybe, scribble on the back of a notepad sort of thing. But that was it in 2012, 2013. So that's come into her sort of remit, and that's had to be nurtured. Then they launched so hot with The Mandalorian, and as she says, built a unique audience via that. And she was very keen to say something that I'm sure you do, and I know me and Mott do all the time, about entry points to Star Wars. It's so generational now as we approach the 50th. That there's multiple, every comic, every cartoon, anything can be an entry point for somebody into Star Wars. So that's so important. I think with Andor, it's proved that, especially I think as a massive change up off the back of Skeleton Crew, Acolyte I enjoyed Acolyte, and I wish they would carry it on. And I really hope they do as either an animation or a dedicated, at least a dedicated Marvel series, so we get visuals of things to move that story on, because they've totally teed things up. But not as live action. That's understood, I think, now. But to go from Skeleton Crew, which was such a joy, so much fun, so fresh, so interesting, such a twist for the good guy not to go back to being the good guy, but actually remain the bad guy. I love that. To go from that to Andor, which we kind of know what we're getting, but Andor season 2 is we see it in the trailer, you see more X-Wings, there's more ships, there's more the machinery of war starting to build up, which was hinted at heavily in Andor season 1, but season 2, I think we're going to see more of that coalescing towards, where we know we're going in Rogue One and A New Hope. I think now they can be confident that they can tell very different types of stories, that you can send a team off to go and make a Skeleton Crew type show, or hopefully a season 2, and have a team do something of substance, genuine sort of dramatic heft. That Andor is a political show. I've always said I'd love to see a West Wing style show with Palpatine climbing the rungs of power, right, to get to where he did, in Phantom, and we know where it goes then. So up and away, but to show them the build towards that, because he couldn't just be a Sith all the time. He was a Sith in secret. He had to be the deftest politician. And then, sure, there's Jedi mind tricks going on. There's also all the little box of tricks that he would use. But nevertheless, that had to be done. All these things had to work for him to get to the level that he got to. Andor, as a show, has shown us as an audience that there's room for mature Star Wars storytelling. So going back to your previous question about having them in 3-episode blocks, if that works, if we sit down on a Tuesday for you, Wednesday for me to watch, the next chapter, I think they're calling it, of Andor, and we just roll from episode 4, 5, and 6, and we go through and watch those episodes together as a block, and then we all talk about it on our, our individual shows. If that works, if that does work for us as reviewers, let's say, and as fans, and the numbers are good for Disney Plus, if that all stacks up, that's a whole new ball game then for Star Wars. That gives them another template that they can sort of pitch at. Would that work for a show like Skeleton Crew? I'm not so sure it would. That felt like the Republic serial vibe of, moving from episode to episode. That was a different tone of show. But for a more meaty political show like Andor, and goodness knows, imagine if they did a New Republic era Mon Mothma show post Jedi in the vein of Andor, telling a similar story after, and they would have to recast certain characters. You can't do that without Leia. They would have to do that, and not as a CG thing, as an actual actress doing that role. Then you really are off to the races, and I think that gives Disney Plus live action Star Wars an identity again, in addition to a Skeleton Crew vibe, or in addition to a Mando thing, which we know works. We know they can go back to the well for that if they want to.
Do you feel that Disney Plus gets TV? I hate to sound, do you think they get it now? But after all the, after you kind of put, like I said, I think this ends an era. It's almost like a Marvel phase between like Mando season 1 and Andor season 2. Do you think it'll be the same? Do you think it gets different? I hate to put on with I know it's like I'm kind of boxing you into a corner on this, but I am curious, going forward, do you think they get it?
I think the difference now with what's happening at the moment, the big game changer is Mandalorian and Grogu, the film. I think, from, I don't know, you could look at Mando season 1, I think it was episode 5 or 6, that came out the week that Rise of Skywalker came out, and you had the scene with Rey healing the snake, the serpent thing, and you had Grogu do the same to Grief Karga. It felt like a little, not they'd planned that. There was a neat little, it's the same power. We've never seen that power before. We've seen it twice in a week. That was cool, but they've never had the opportunity in the way that, I don't know, Star Trek in the 90s, when you'd got Generations of First Contact, but you got DS9 and Voyager happening at the same time. They could touch on things and mention things in the TV show that were happening in the films, and the Dominion War gets mentioned in First Contact, and what was the one after that? Insurrection. So, there was options to sort of overlap loosely. Disney Plus now, once Ahsoka season 2's out, I don't know whether that will come out. Well, it will come out after Mandalorian and Grogu. So whatever's happening in Ahsoka will presumably, and that is an assumption, have some sort of ramifications of what we saw in Mando and Grogu, depending on when and where they set Mando and Grogu. We're not 100% sure where that's set, really. But I think going forward, there's nothing I'd like more with the Daisy stuff coming now. That feels like that's getting ahead of steam. That if they did the Daisy film, New Jedi Order, and set up some sort of TV, I wouldn't even call it a spin-off. That's not the right phrase. Something to run parallel, something to help build that era. We see characters that maybe come into the film peripherally or prominently, doesn't matter either. And we see some of the worlds set up. So you're going to have loads of surprises in the film. I'm not saying you'd see Daisy in a TV show, but they can parlay one off the other. They can grab the audience to pull them to the cinema. They can tell the cinema audience, you need to see this show. There's always a kickback on that when people are, I've got to watch Incredible Hulk, Falcon and Winter Soldier, and the Eternals to understand Captain America: Brave New World. No, you don't. But if you've seen them, it's great because there's little bits that you go, adamantium, that's Wolverine, that's Deadpool and Wolverine. There's the little hooking things. Star Wars doesn't need to do that to that degree. But if you want to get into it, if you want to go and watch it, you'll benefit from it. It's sold in the wrong way. So that's the difference, I think, going forward.
I think for a future conversation, I think the role of Disney Plus and the movies, and in a post Endgame and Mando Grogu world, is going to be something I think we'll be chewing on for some time. But I do want to get to just one last question as we kind of wrap up this episode. I am curious. You're going to Celebration Japan. What are some of the things that you're looking for right there? I know, like I said, it's a tight question, but I am kind of curious since you'll be boots on the ground there.
This time round, I'm usually involved in the podcast stage,
right.
Sort of helping to manage it and be involved. I'm not this time. It's a much smaller show, and they've got a team that are based over in Japan that I understand are taking care of that. So we have got a podcast. There's a Good Morning Tatooine Making Tracks podcast that will happen on the stage. We're still working out what we're going to do and how it's all going to come together, but that's being worked on. So that's on the Sunday, I think. So that really at the show, we pitched a couple of panels that didn't quite make it, which is fine. It's the first show for, since probably Celebration 6, where I'm waggling the air quotes. I'm just there as a fan, pretty much, because they didn't have a podcast stage back then. I'm quite proud. I'm the only person that's appeared on every Celebration podcast stage. No one's done every single show, so I'm quite chuffed with that. So that's a little streak I'm happy to continue. But I want to enjoy Japan because I've never been and I might never get out there again. So I really want to soak up as much of that as possible. But in terms of the show, I'm really hoping for some reveals. I think back to Essen. To me, Japan and Essen feel very similar in size and tone. And Essen is Celebration Europe 2 is so fondly looked upon by people who are at that show. And looking back, there was so many reveals. So many things got mentioned at that show and just great panels and all sorts of really cool stuff. So even though I think most people's eyes are on the 50th, and I think we're all assuming I think it's going to be Orlando. It's just a bigger site. We're by Disney. I think it'll be in May. I can't see how you can't have the 50th anniversary not be in May. So I'm thinking May in Orlando in 2027, I wish. that everybody who can be there, that'll be the biggest congregation of our fandom, I think, we'd have probably ever seen. Dedicated Star Wars fans. Because we're all, as soon as that's announced, and I really hope they don't hang around announcing it. I hope they get that news out there quick and give everyone a couple of years to save hard and plan and prep and get their accommodation sorted, because it's not a cheap game. That's the one. That really is the one. So, but other than that, just meeting fellow fans, catching up with folks. I want to, go to as many. I'm looking into when the 501st party is and the bash and all that sort of stuff. I haven't got the details on that, so I'm hoping to find out more about that because I've got a few friends that are curious as well. So just anything like that, and just enjoying it as a fan. But I have got some again, air quotes, work to do, because I am trying to gather a bit of information and do some articles from Insider as well as all the Fantha stuff. I mean, how I'm going to keep the site going for 2 weeks whilst I'm travelling around Japan, I don't quite know. We might just have to just put a banner up and saying back in May or something.
Well, I think we're definitely going to have to break protocol this year and bring you back sometime later on in the year because there's just going to be so much post-celebration and, all the announcements and post-TV. I know we've got a couple of the animation series, so there's still a lot of ground to cover and a lot of work for you to do. But just briefly, as we kind of let you go, hopefully I'll be seeing you in person for London Film Comic-Con in July. But until that time, where can people find Fantha Tracks and get geared up for all the stuff that's going down?
Everything on socials is at Fantha Tracks. Fanthatracks.com, that's the hub. So all the podcasts, all the YouTube, all the obviously the news and the socials all hook into that. So if your starting point is Fanthatracks.com, and then you filter out to whatever your particular flavour might be, whichever social or YouTube or pod or whatever it might be, that's the place to start. And if you want to throw insults at me, it's prefect_timing on socials as well. So always happy for a chat.
Mark, thank you for your time. I know you're one of the busiest people in Star Wars news and the fandom, and it's just always a pleasure to catch up with our annual chat. Nice to see you. Nice to see you on camera, but hoping we'll get to see and hear more from you. And congratulations once again on the Star Wars Insider article.
Oh, really appreciate that. It's very kind. And it looks like I'll be seeing you in London then in July.
Yes.
I'd like to check out, refuel my ship, prepare for my immediate departure.
Once again, I want to thank my guest, Mark Newbold from Fantha Tracks, for being on the program. It was a pleasure to get a chance to speak with him again, and I definitely think we're going to need to bring him back on sooner rather than later, because there's just so much in this, and these are oftentimes episodes I'll go back to and listen time and time again, just because there's just so much goodness in here. All right, I'm going to let Card Squadron take it out, and we'll talk again soon.
The Rebel Base Card podcast focuses on cards, collecting, and the Star Wars community, and appreciates you coming along for the ride.
If you have any feedback for this episode, you can reach out to the program in a number of ways. You can leave a comment on the Instagram post for this episode. You can also DM Greg on Instagram at Rebel Base Card.
Make sure to also follow the Rebel Base Card on Twitter and Facebook at Rebel Base Card. If you want, you can send an email to greg@rebelbasecard.com.
And you can find show notes for this and all episodes on the website rebelbasecard.com. In the Star Wars Card Trader app and just about every other one, you can find Greg at CornFedTech.
The Rebel Base Card uses the hashtag Card Squadron as a way to alert friends about cool cards and recent drops in the galaxy far, far away. It's a great way to bring our community a little bit closer together and help one another finish our sets in time. We collect, communicate, and commiserate. Well, at least when we run out of credits or crystals to spend on our digital collections. Join the fun, even if all the other cool squadron names were already taken. And remember, we collect as one and would be honored if you join us.
And if you are a sketch card artist, or Star Wars artist or collector, cosplayer, and want to talk about your work, your craft or passion, drop Greg a line. I'm sure he'd love to hear your story. You can also help the show by leaving a comment or review on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you got this episode.
Otherwise, the mission is clear. Keep those cards out of the hands of the Empire, and the Rebel Base Card will return soon.
This podcast is not affiliated in any way with Topps, Disney, or Star Wars, nor is it endorsed by Disney or Lucasfilm, and is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. All names and sounds, and any other related items are properties of their respective trademarks and or copyright holders here in the U.S. and abroad. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com.
That's it.